Boy, has your Justice Department, where you used to work, changed.
You can say that again.
To see that Todd Blanche, the former Trump attorney, his former personal attorney, number 2 at the DOJ, is going to Florida, there now actually, with Ghislaine Maxwell, meeting behind closed doors. It seems to me, David Katz, that one need only use some reasonable, rational thought to know that they're trying to broker some deal to figure out what she might say to kind of get past this Epstein mess.
Well, it's utterly reprehensible, Mark. It looks like she wants a pardon. That seems to be her only hope to get out of prison earlier than 85% of her 20-year federal prison sentence, which will go on at least for another decade, absent a pardon from Trump. You figure whoever's Trump's Democratic successor is not likely to pardon her. Why on earth would a Democratic president pardon her? I mean, the crimes are just reprehensible, Mark. It's child rape. It's conspiracy to engage in child rape. It's all of this money laundering that was done on top of that. And, according to the evidence presented to the jury, Mark, and accepted by the jury, she was in some ways more instrumental in the child rape allegations than even Jeffrey Epstein, because it was having a woman approach these young women. It was the way that she could talk to them as a fellow woman. It was the way that she, explained what they were going to do and groomed them. That was a huge part. And, some of the shows have read the transcripts. Now, remember, the prosecutor on this case was this Maureen Comey, who just got fired. She's also the daughter of James Comey, the famous former FBI director that Trump is also after. But she got fired by the DOJ out of Washington herself. So they've read some transcripts, and it's pretty appalling, the testimony and the proof against Maxwell. So
yeah, to your point, Maxwell was, and having read some of this myself, Maxwell was very much involved in gaining the trust of these women, and that's what you're talking about with the grooming. And it's absolutely, it's so immoral, it makes your head explode that she is very much a key figure in bringing these women into that world, and then the way they are forcibly trafficked in all the ways that they were subsequently.
And then when Trump was asked about it a few years ago, you would imagine all the comments that a decent person really interested in the victims in this case would make about her. And he says, well, I wish her well. I wish her the best. Another one of Trump's statements that's so peculiar in the context that you think it must be a communication with her. If you look out for me, Miss Maxwell, I'll look out for you. Just looking at it from the point of view of her criminal defense attorney, Mark, and don't get mad, I'm not taking her side in any way, shape, or form, but looking at it from her criminal defense attorney, I think that she thinks that she can divide the case, or her attorney thinks that he can divide the case into kind of two parts. She does have this legal argument, and just very quickly, so people will recall, her legal argument goes like this. Jeffrey Epstein is given a sweetheart deal down in the federal investigation of him, federal criminal investigation of him about a decade ago down in Florida. Believe it or not, someone who went on to be in Trump's first cabinet, this Acosta, was the U.S. attorney handling that investigation. He decided to just let the state take charge of it. And Epstein got an amazingly lenient sentence where he just served some, he could do whatever he wanted during the day, and he just had to sleep in this barracks sort of place at night. And that was only for about a year. That was Epstein 1. That was the first criminal conviction of Epstein. As part of making that deal, he signs an agreement with the federal government in the Southern District of Florida, which says that not only I, but 4 of my co-conspirators will be given immunity. She is not named. Miss Maxwell is not named as one of those 4 conspirators. So that's a very good reason to think that she is not one of the co-conspirators who might be included in that extraordinarily weird deal. But even if so, it covered only the Southern District of Florida. It didn't cover the Southern District of New York, where the government found they not only had a case that they could bring, but a case with venue there. Now, this drives me crazy as a criminal defense attorney. I have all these white-collar people normally who haven't paid taxes according to the government. They are not child traffickers. They are not involved in child rape. But it is true that the standard agreement, Mark, only gives you protection in that district. And you kind of have to take it or leave it, because you just can't negotiate any more than that. You can't get the government to say, we will give you nationwide protection. We will give you immunity from prosecution if you accept this agreement in every district in the country. You just figure, come on, my guy is not going to get charged in some other district. Well, her argument is that that immunity covered her. That's the issue that is headlining in the U.S. Supreme Court. Most people think that the Supreme Court's going to either not take that case or they're going to deny her relief. They're going to say Epstein had to deal with the Southern District of Florida. And even assuming for a moment that it covered you, it didn't cover you anywhere but in the Southern District of Florida. And you, Miss Maxwell, were not charged in the Southern District of Florida. So people think, well, why didn't she talk during the case itself? And of course, it may have been that she had nothing really very much to say and people wouldn't believe her. One of the allegations against her was perjury. Are you lying now or were you lying then? You were lying when you got convicted of perjury. We know that because you got convicted of perjury and investigated for perjury, but you're telling the truth now. So anybody that she would actually testify against at this point would have a tremendous ability to impeach her based upon the fact that she was either investigated or maybe even successfully prosecuted for perjury. So from her lawyer's point of view, why not cut this into two pieces? Why not see how far you get with the legal argument? If you can somehow get this immunity, get some court to rule in favor. If the U.S. Supreme Court denies certiorari or says no, that claim doesn't wash, that dog won't hunt. Then you say, wait, now I have all of this information. And when someone says, well, the information's really late, it must be concocted, why'd you bring it up? Then the answer is going to be, because I had this really good legal argument. I wanted to run that one up the flagpole. It's not working. Now I want to talk. Of course, what everybody suspects is that she doesn't really want to talk against anybody. They want her to talk for Trump. And that the whole deal is that she will give a version of events which exonerates Trump's and Trump's cronies and big buddies. And they'll say, oh my goodness, now we have the right now we have the Oracle at Delphi. Now we have the Ebus. We have the real story. Miss Maxwell has cleared this whole thing up. All the Republicans under suspicion and Trump are completely exonerated. And that's what Dershowitz is kind of, this Alan Dershowitz is kind of implying all the time when he says, well, nobody currently in the government is in there, but she knows everything that's in there. That she knows everything that's in there. It's a long stretch, Mark, from that. It's a long walk from her knowing what people really did to her telling it honestly, when the only thing that she can gain from all of this is a pardon from Trump. Why would anyone in their right mind, why would her attorney in his right mind have her present any evidence? And what would this deputy attorney general, who used to be Trump's criminal defense attorney, what would he be down there really to do? If you believe that he's down there in great pursuit of the truth, let the chips fall where they may. Are you kidding me? You think that that's what he wants to go down there and let the chips fall where they may? And the last thing is that Trump could, most of these statutes don't have, some I think have no statute of limitations, but there are very long statutes of limitations for these kinds of offenses, child rape and things related to them. And so Trump could very well end up being a suspect in that. And I imagine that his attorney would be the same deputy attorney general. So the idea that deputy attorney general is somehow objectively or for the public looking into this down at the Florida prison is to me ludicrous. And I think that there's an ethical violation. I mean, nothing quite like this has come up before, but boy, just as a matter of ethics, he shouldn't be in the middle of this. There must be some other attorney in America who could represent Trump and go down there and talk to this lady, but not the deputy attorney general. So I think that he's in potential ethical hot water, which is really saying something, because I don't think that people have really said that attorney, they said an awful lot of things about the other attorney, the one who's up for the Third Circuit, but this particular attorney, I don't think that they've made very many ethical allegations against him. And so I think that this is a lapse. And all I can think of is he's getting so much pressure from Trump. It's like basically do this or quit. Trump is telling him in a very nice way, you're a great lawyer, but do this or quit. And he's going down there to go talk to her. But I think this whole thing is fraud. I think this thing is near scandalous, him going down there. And the last thing I want to say is normally this is done by the FBI's and the FBI agents and the line prosecutors on the case. That's where this ought to start. Who you'd expect to go down there would be 3 FBI agents, right? And one of the U.S. attorneys who was on the case from the Southern District of New York, who knows the case inside and out. Of course, they just fired the most apt person for that, Maureen Comey, but there must be somebody else on the staff. And so you got to think that they don't really want to know the truth. If they really wanted to know the truth, they would send somebody from that case who knew it inside and out, and not the Deputy Attorney General, big buddy, criminal defense attorney of Trump.
Of course, as typical with this administration and this crew, it's all done in the ham-fisted, lack of sleight of hand way. There is not anything that could happen with this guy Blanche, who is number 2 at the DOJ, meeting with her, that isn't on track anyway to make some deal for what she might say. And what I'd ask you, David Katz, because you are so good about gaming out what like she might say. In other words, you just in the last couple of minutes said, she could say this, she might be impugned in this way because of the perjury, et cetera. But really all Trump cares about, right, David, is I don't really care about all that. Just make sure she says, I know all this. Donald Trump might have been on a plane or 2 or 7, but he wasn't anywhere near anything. Trump was never part of it. I knew everything, and Trump was never part of anything. He basically just wants her to say some version of that, right?
That's exactly what I fear. So
how do you get to that point? Well, what does that look like? I mean, legally, do you have to, you parade her out in court? And in other words, it's tough for me to figure out how you legally get that sort of deal made.
Well, he commutes her sentence. And there's a huge drumbeat that this is an outrage. It's been misunderstood this whole time. She wasn't nearly involved in Jeffrey Epstein's crimes as the Democrats made it out to look. They wanted to make her look terrible because they were worried she was going to turn on the Democrats. And now this conspiracy by the Democrats to make her look worse than she is has been exposed. It's a great day, Liberation Day, when she gets her commutation. And she gives this testimony in Congress, which is very favorable to Trump, his big donors and allies.
So by the way, I get that. I get that first part. I get everything you just said, although I like that you put some specifics on it. And it's the second part right there at the end. So you're saying this is all playing up. That's what she's going to get. We got to get the commutation, et cetera, time served. But he's going to get is, Trump's going to get is the congressional testimony that will then clear him. Is that the forum in which she'll clear his name?
It may be that she will give some statement, with Blanche and with her lawyer, and that statement will be deemed so overpowering. There'll be a couple of lines from that are trumpeted over and over again. No real need to waste Congress's time with all this. Congress has very important business, the economy, the this, the that, way too important. The problem of bringing her into Congress to testify is that there are some very good questioners, especially on the Democratic side. And some of the Republicans are really going to get heat. That would be an absolute circus with the right wingers demanding, ask her this, ask her that. What about the other thing? The Democrats would be demanding whether they would get it or not, but the Democrats would be demanding that the victims take the stand. There was a fellow who was on MSNBC, an attorney. I'm really sorry, I forgot his name, but he represents a lot of these victims. They were at the time girls. He represents them. Well, he wants to get his 2 cents in, Mark, and say this is an outrage where this thing is going. Let's think about the victims. But yeah, Trump will try to orchestrate this so that they don't have to release the records. We now know that in, I guess, a couple of months ago, Pam Bondi, and you have to think the FBI head, Kash Patel, knew about it too. It's just extraordinary to think that the head of the Attorney General would meet with Trump and tell Trump, hey, you're all over these Jeffrey Epstein records, and that the FBI director wouldn't be in the meetings, this Kash Patel, who was so controversial to be confirmed in the first place. He got on the show, I think it was Rogan's show, and he says to him something like, does Trump know he's in the records? And Kash Patel says something like, well, I don't know how he would. Well, the way that he would know Kash Patel at the time that Kash Patel said, how would I know, was that Pam Bondi, his boss, and we're going to find out pretty much from logs, people will talk, whether he was in there. So how would he know at the time he answered that question? How would I know? Because he was in the meeting or was briefed on the meeting where Trump was told. And then, of course, you start drawing logical conclusions that the reason that the Jeffrey Epstein files weren't turned over was that, I mean, of course, Trump knew that he was in there in the sense that he was, hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein all the time. But I think it was much more specific than that. And I think that Trump concluded this was going to really hurt him, and there was no dancing around it. And then he came up with this total dodge of, well, we'll do whatever the courts say. And of course, he picked the path, Mark, that was least likely to reveal anything that the public's interested in, instead of taking the path that was most likely. The path most likely was to simply use his executive authority, him and Pat Bondi, to release all the stuff, redacting out victims' names and some things. The way that was least likely to get any information before the public was to try to get the grand jury records, where his attorneys were smart enough to say you'll have to go through a federal judge, and a federal judge will probably deny it. And then I think Trump was hoping that he would say, well, the federal judge denied it. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Let's move on. And one of the reasons it was so likely, Mark, that the federal judge would deny it is that first of all, grand jury secrecy is a real thing. I mean, people go to jail for revealing grand jury transcripts. It's one of those things that's really sacrosanct. What happens in front of the grand jury, and the justification for that, we defense attorneys go crazy. We want to know if there's any misconduct in there, if there's anything that would help our clients. And we're always told, no, 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 you can't have it. And one of the reasons is that innocent people would be hurt. That the grand jury is not only to indict those who look like they're responsible for crimes, but to not indict those who look like they're not responsible for crimes. And for those people, it would be, public opprobrium, all of that, to allow that to be disseminated. So it was pretty obvious that it was not going to be allowed by the federal judge. And on top of that, that's always just a very condensed version. It's all that they want to present to the grand jury to get the grand jury to return an indictment against two specific people, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Okay, it's not to go into who are all the other people involved. That's extraneous. So it was designed, if it worked at all, to not provide any information that the people want to know. And what, of course, the people, including the right-wing MAGA base, want to know is who the hell else is in there? Who else is culpable for what Jeffrey Epstein and Maxwell were up to?
Yeah. The grand jury testimony, even if revealed, as you say, it's just one thousandth of what people want to know. The House Oversight Committee, though, voting yesterday, David Katz, to subpoena the Department of Justice to release those Jeffrey Epstein files, passed by an 8-2 vote, and notably, 3 GOP lawmakers, Nancy Mace, Scott Perry, and Brian Jack, joined with the Democrats on that subcommittee to approve that subpoena. They defied the Republican leadership in doing that. Legally, they are compelled to, under what set of circumstances, this might be the way to ask it, might the Justice Department be compelled by Congress to release those files?
Except for 1 or 2 of those Republicans in the House, they're huge phonies playing a big game of bait and switch on the public, including their own Republican constituents and the MAGA base. If they really wanted to get somewhere, here's what it takes. 5 Republican House members, not the 11 that supposedly are adamant about this, 5 of them to say to the Speaker, we will not go in, we will not leave for the summer right now. We will enforce this subpoena. The 5 of us are demanding, Mr. Speaker, that you enforce this subpoena to get these records, and you do all of these other things to move this investigation along right now. And the 5 of us are going to not agree to adjourn. We are going to remove you as Speaker if you adjourn us. Those 5 Republican House members could have made this happen. So this is all, game playing where they act like they're so outraged. And these 3 who voted for it, they're also big game players, because they could have made the House Republicans in Congress just stick around, because all the Democrats would have voted to stick around. They would have been happy to remove the Speaker to enforce the subpoenas. So I think the reality is that no one's going to really be around to enforce the subpoenas. They're all going to go home. There won't be anybody to do anything until September, by which time the Republicans and Trump hope that the public has forgotten about this. I don't see any.
But just to be clear, there's no expiration date on that subpoena. They come back, they reconvene in September, and they would have to at least respond to the subpoena.
They would have to respond to the subpoena. I mean, right now, if the subpoena was issued to the Department of Justice and it said you have a date certain, let's say it's August 15th. They'll produce something by August 15th, but it'll be the Department of Justice's, Trump's Department of Justice ideas of what helps them to produce. And then when people say, wait a second, you didn't comply with the subpoena, what about this, what about that? They'll be long gone in September. they'll come back. Wait a second, what you produced on August 15th was totally non-compliant. The can will get kicked down the road, and they hope that there'll be other things that grab the public's attention, and that people will have, as Trump says, why is everyone so interested in Jeffrey Epstein? Well, let's say you were during the campaign, all of your cronies were. And of course, this is the classic, the chickens coming home to roost, that look out watch what you ask for, you might get it.
Yeah.
And of course, now that they get it, now that they have the power to release all that stuff, they don't want to. The other remarkable thing is suing the Wall Street Journal, which seems to have great story after great story. And people think, why on earth are they doing that? These two titans of the right, Trump and Murdoch. But Murdoch, I think, is smart enough to realize that there'll be a Wall Street Journal, there'll be a New York Post, there'll be a lot of his empire 3.5 years from now, and Trump will be an ex-president. So I think Murdoch is looking at the long game and the reputation of the Wall Street Journal, which, let's face it, right now is stellar. I mean, what a coup for the Wall Street Journal, this series of stories they're running.
Well, it only improves their reputation that they, as you say, take on this series of stories, right?
Yeah.
They're not just carrying the water for the president or for a political party. I wonder if you think that there's...
Mark, one last thing. I see Trump's suit as going absolutely nowhere. One thing is that, ABC and CBS both wanted something, needed something, and Trump made it clear that that was the quid pro quo. But I don't think Fox really needs anything, or that Murdoch empire. They're in pretty good shape. They've got Sky News over in Europe. I don't think that they really need his regulatory approval of anything. And so why not run up the value of the credibility of the Wall Street Journal? And people say, why did he file the lawsuit when he was sure to lose it, Trump? But Trump had to, in the theater of it,
Sure.
I'm going to sue you, and I sued you. He needed the theater of that.
That's a great point, though, about them not needing anything. I want to ask you, because Katz was so correct, the appeals court finding that Donald Trump's effort to end birthright citizenship is unconstitutional and does uphold the block on his effort to end birthright citizenship. So congratulations, Katz. You said it would happen. What is the future of that? Is he really going to keep bumping this up to the Supremes? I guess he will.
Yeah, this is the Ninth Circuit that ruled 2-1 that the injunction could stay in effect. And the injunction basically bars Trump trying to enforce a ban on birthright citizenship. In other words, it bars him from doing things like you get born in the United States and it's not registered, or you're not registered with some federal agency. All of those things that he was going to do to create havoc and make people's lives miserable. He can't do those things, because at the end of the day, there is a right to birthright citizenship. The interesting thing in the Ninth Circuit, and there was a ruling like that in New Hampshire too. Remember, there's a judge in New Hampshire who certified a class action brought by all the people born in the United States as of like 2 weeks ago. They're in that class. They all have this interest in saying the same thing, which is that we were born in the United States. We have a right to be citizens. He certified that class. So there's a parallel case that basically establishes the same principle in San Francisco or in somewhere in the West Coast. Anyway, This is the Court of Appeals that covers the West Coast. It was only 2-1. Now you might say, well, wait a second. One judge, Trumpy, of course, appointed by Trump, the one judge, he disagrees with Katz. He has a different copy of the Constitution, which doesn't say born in the United States. No, his point was that this was too close to a nationwide injunction. This was too much to the universal injunctions. So he didn't agree that there should be an injunction kept in place. The two said, yes, there is an injunction in place. And on the merits, there is birthright citizenship. So I think that, especially with the one Trumpy vote, I think that this is going to go up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And I think that Trump is I don't think he can back down on this one and accept this defeat in the largest circuit in America. I think he feels like he has to take it to the U.S. Supreme Court. And they'll meet it when they can't dodge it anymore. The U.S. Supreme Court will meet it. And even the 6 of them, 7 of them, maybe all 9 of them will say that the Constitution is very clear. It means what it says. And it says that if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen, notwithstanding the status of your parents.
Part of Donald Trump's signature tax legislation takes money from Planned Parenthood. And they went to court over this, David Katz. And the victory is partial, I guess, in this legal fight with Trump. A provision in that bill, reading from this report, ends Medicaid benefits for 1 year to abortion providers that received more than $800,000 from Medicaid in 2023, even to those like Planned Parenthood that also offer things that have nothing to do with abortion, like contraception, pregnancy tests, and STD testing. The U.S. District Court judge in Boston granted a preliminary injunction that for now blocks the government from cutting Medicaid payments to Planned Parenthood or member organizations that either don't provide abortion care or didn't meet a threshold of at least $800,000 in Medicaid reimbursements in a given year. It's not clear right away how many Planned Parenthood organizations and clinics would actually continue to get Medicaid reimbursements under this decision, but it seems as though it's a partial victory for Planned Parenthood.
It looks like it's a victory for the Planned Parenthood branches that are very small because they'll have less than $800,000 at issue. And apparently that threshold is in the legislation or something like that. I guess it's in the big ugly bill. And so the way that they wrote it, I guess the judge said, well, that protects you. You can still get your funding if it's less than $800,000. So that may be for some very small offices. And then if you don't provide any abortion services at all, let's say the office in Baltimore doesn't provide any abortion services, even if it's millions and millions of dollars, it still gets the Medicaid money because it doesn't provide any abortion. So it's sure not total victory. And the Republicans in the big ugly bill, this was not the moderate Republicans. This was the real anti-choice Republicans getting their way and defunding Planned Parenthood because it provides a choice. It provides abortions to people who are determined to need them and want them.
Well, and again, so much of what Planned Parenthood does has nothing to do with abortion. And so they've been smeared in a sense, and their jihad on the part of the GOP has included, defunding them, when the reality is most of what they do has nothing to do with abortion. I wanted to ask you about something that is associated with revelations coming out of these confinement centers, detention centers. There's one in New York City that is just brutal. There is footage showing people sleeping on the floor next to toilets in this facility. It's clearly overpacked. It is incredibly cold in these rooms in Manhattan. And it shows this footage about 24 men in these bare rooms, some lying on the floor. They're in these aluminum emergency blankets, some of them. Others just sit on benches. And there are 2 toilets that are just feet away from where people sleep, separated by this low wall. There's no privacy whatsoever. There was a guy who was detained, and he snuck a cell phone in and was able to record these images. So I'm asking and mentioning these things in the context of the law, which is your area of expertise, because I'm wondering if there is anything legally that can be done to speak up for these people who would seem to have no agency in the American justice system, those detainees.
Well, the 8th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution bars cruel and unusual punishment. So I'm sure that some advocacy groups are arguing that these terms of confinement constitute cruel and unusual punishment. We'll see judge by judge how far they get. They may be able to ameliorate some of the conditions just because the administration has so many things to fight over. Maybe they'll try to improve these facilities and avoid some of these fights, bearing in mind that just like with the bad cops, the bad prison guards hate any exposure. They hate anything in the sunshine, which shows what bad cops, they're like the cams, the people filming what's going on when the cops arrive and do brutal things. And the prisons, how bad they actually are. I can say from having visited a few prisons, especially some state prisons, some of them were just awful. Just couldn't get my head around anybody having to be confined there. And I had a client or two who was confined in such a place. The Montgomery City Jail in Alabama comes to mind. I had a client who was there for a while. But generally, these cases of cruel and unusual punishment, Mark, they don't tend to succeed. And if it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court, it's just very hard to imagine that the 6 of them are going to say that these are cruel and unusual punishment. I don't want to always be the one giving the other side of it, But I suppose the Trump administration would say, now that we have all of this money, we can provide some blankets to these poor people. We can upgrade the conditions. I don't think that's what they're going to use the money for, but presumably they'll use some of the money to make some of these conditions better. It's just awful. Part of it is to get these people to sign papers. You know, they deny them lawyers, they deny them any legal assistance, and they hope that these conditions are so awful that, you know, within hours, they'll agree to voluntary deportation. They'll say, yes, put me on a plane, get me out of this hellhole. And there's thousands of them who are being put on planes, supposedly consenting to leave. And they're consenting because of these awful conditions and because they don't have a lawyer to give them advice that, you know, you may be able to challenge this.
Yeah, it's part of the entire structure of the immigration aggression on the part of ICE that the brutality is a feature, not a bug. It's supposed to send the message, get out of here, because it can get a lot worse than even it is now.
That's why they're sending people to South Sudan. It can't possibly be efficient in any kind of money-saving way or anything, but you get the message, okay, I'm being sent to a country where everyone's starving, where there's a civil war. I'm going to either self-deport or I'm not going to come to America in the first place. It's really of a piece with separating children in the first Trump administration, mothers and children. That was awful. And everyone said, oh my God, this is awful. America shouldn't be doing this. But Trump's thing would be, well, it works. It deters people. And that's exactly what Trump would say about this. It deters people that we're sending them to such horrible things. You know, we're doing such awful, awful things to them. And we're not concerned about the reputation of America in the world and including going forward. It's just, you know, transactional. It's that moment. And he has managed to have people stop crossing the border at the rate that they were under the Biden administration. Believe me, he's going to try to run on that. The Republicans are going to try to run on that. That you know, it was ugly, but it worked. It was ugly, but it worked. And you didn't want all those people in America that Biden was letting in. That's one of the things he's going to run on. We're going to run on the economy and the tariffs and all the terrible things that he's done. And he's going to run on some of this. The cruelty worked.
Well, you can run just as an aside on the economy, but the economy may be seriously affected by the brutality. Like one is connected to the other. You keep pulling all these construction workers off of job sites. You keep pulling all these high school graduates who are stellar stars out of their high school graduation. And after a while, these things do have an effect on the American economy. You go to Home Depot, you go to Lowe's, you go to kitchens, restaurants, and all the other places, childcare services. And before you know it, your economy is dramatically affected by the loss of all of these people who have done nothing wrong. A federal
judge.
That's
why we're going to win, Mark. That's why the Democrats are going to win the midterms.
You know, from your
among
lips,
other reasons.
Yes. Quickly, David, I know I'm going to lose, but just on this, Kilmar Abrego Garcia released from this Tennessee prison on a judge's order. He'd been held there since he got back from El Salvador, which was a wrongful deportation, as you know. And then it was stipulated by this U.S. district judge that immigration and customs enforcement officials are not permitted to arrest him as soon as he is released. And that's kind of the other dance they do with these people who are wrongly confined. They're released and then they're immediately arrested again. They say, the judge does, if the Trump administration wants to deport him to another country aside from El Salvador, which they've expressed interest in doing, they have to give his attorneys 3 business days notice in order to prepare a defense. Some thoughts?
Well, I certainly think that that's an equitable ruling by the district judge in Tennessee who has that case. I'm not sure if the Trump administration is going to accept it, just as Katz. They may say that that's beyond the authority of the district judge, that the district judge can release him on bail, which apparently the district judge is about to do because he's got this criminal accusation, which seems very weak against him, that he's a trafficker and he was driving some people through Tennessee and he got a ticket and they've made a big deal out of that. They try to make a federal case out of that right now against him, federal criminal case. So I think the judge can release him on bail. But I think the Trump administration may go to the circuit down there, which I think is a pretty conservative one, and say that this district judge did not have the authority to say what the immigration authorities can or cannot do with him after that. There is an order, remember, that he couldn't be removed at all And that was the illegality of sending him down there to El Salvador when a judge had previously ruled he could not be sent to El Salvador because his life was at risk if he was sent to El Salvador. So maybe they could go back to that judge, you with me, Abrego Garcia's lawyers, and get relief from him. But what the Tennessee judge is trying to do may be ultra virus. It may be beyond the power that he really has. He has power over that case, U.S. versus Abrego Garcia, in his criminal courtroom, but he may not have power over everything that happens to Abrego Garcia. So we'll have to wait and see what actually happens. What I would like to see is Abrego Garcia get out on bail and be able to have a press conference and tell the world the torture and inhumane treatment that he suffered at the hands of the Trump administration. They were pulling the strings on the world's coolest dictator down there in El Salvador, self-described. That dictator calls himself the world's coolest dictator.
No, he peacocks about it. Absolutely right. Brags
He's made life absolutely hell for his opponents. All of his opponents who have the means have tried to get out of the country because he means to have an absolutely authoritarian. People throw around the word fascist regime. I think he'd probably fess up to fascist too, and the way he plans to destroy and kill, his opposition down there. So I wish that Abrego Garcia could talk about, like in a press conference, talk to the nation how he was forced to sit for 9 hours straight. And if he fell over day after day from the exertion of sitting 9 hours straight on his knees, then they would beat him if he fell on the floor. And they did all of these other awful things. Remember, they did that to everybody there. He's just the only one who was lived to tell. And I would love to have him tell his story to the American people, which it seems like that's one thing that he could do. That's another reason why I think the Trump administration is going to try to find some way to either deport him right away or do something with him right away.
They don't want to talk
before he tells the nation and goes on these talk shows. But I sure hope he does that.
I have one last thing, and that relates to Colombia. Columbia University made a deal. They're going to pay more than $220 million in an agreement that's supposed to resolve the threat of these funding cuts to Columbia University. Well, you'll remember the reason they're settling is they were being attacked and sued, and they pulled their funding, the federal funding, because the administration said didn't protect Jewish students during all of the protests at Columbia University and created an environment of anti-Semitism at Columbia. So Columbia is paying. I mean, this is no small amount of money, $200 million in this settlement. Now, I think you're going to tell me they did it because they have even more money in federal grants in the offing. So pay the $200 million, you'll get even more money from the feds by tapping out this way.
Well, Mark, I was invited onto a show in New York. This is a bigger story in New York than anywhere because Columbia University, of course, is in Manhattan on the Upper West Side, Morningside Heights, right near the Hudson River, to sort of situate it for people. And it was at the same time as your show, Mark, so I decided to do your show, but I was all ready to go.
Come on.
In case they could juggle the two of them, I was all ready to go on this Columbia. And I think I was going to be the middle of the road guest there was one group that was going to say one guest was going to say Columbia was just awful and they got what they deserved. And another was going to say, like a lot of the professors have said, that this is an outrage and that once you give in to a blackmailer and an extortionist, they just keep blackmailing you and extort you. And that's what Columbia can be looking forward to for the next 3.5 years. Never give an inch. And I was going to be the one to say that if I was on the board of trustees at Columbia, I think I would have voted for this. And the reason I think I would have voted for this is because Harvard has this unbelievable endowment. And no slight on Columbia, but Harvard is almost in a world of its own in terms of how huge its endowment is and how prominent it is in the public's mind. And I thought Harvard is one of the few universities that could really endure fighting the Trump administration and fight them for the whole 4 years. And that may be what Harvard's going to do, all the way to the Supreme Court, fight them, let them stop their cancer research, let them stop their infectious disease research unless the courts force the federal government to fork over the money to Harvard. I thought Columbia was making kind of a wise decision. First, the $220 million, wise given the situation that they're in, Mark. The $220 million they're going to pay over 3 years. So the Trump administration has some incentive, I guess, not to keep piling on them, right? Because they only get $70 million a year, and then after 3 years, Trump's over. So that was one reason to pay. And then it's like $1.4 billion that they were going to lose, or even more than 1.4 billion. And unless some court miraculously, the courts made them pay the money, Colombia was really going to have to stop doing this major research, and they had major research studies that were going to come to an end, Mark. So they'd spent spending years doing these studies, and the study would have to stop. The study that they spent over $1 billion on was going to become worthless because the study was going to have to stop, midway.
Researchers estimate that Colombia was likely facing another $1.2 billion in frozen fundings from the NIH after the Trump administration cut the original $400 million from the top research university. And that is what you're talking about. They would have to drop all of these research projects in mid-research.
And it may be that these huge universities that have so many different facets, maybe they can't really be the top cancer researchers anymore. Maybe that has to be done, at some place that's not so much, and because another administration could come along. You may think, well, there'll never be another one like Trump. But if you're looking at it from Colombia's point of view, you're looking at the next 50, 70 years of what kind of institution they're going to be. Maybe this will be the norm. Every time they don't like the politics or the decisions of some university, they take away this research funding, and the research can't live without this funding, Mark. It seems that the two are a little bit incompatible. In the Harvard case up in Boston, the district judge said, what on earth does $2 billion to Harvard? This is not Columbia now. $2 billion to Harvard, cutting off the $2 billion for cancer and infectious disease research. What does that have to do with anti-Semitism? But that disproportionality, that clash will happen university after university. And it may be that they have to decide they're going to be basically a university like we think of Columbia being, or we're going to be this huge research mill that has billions of dollars coming in from NIH and HHS for the research function. But let me go into just one other thing, Mark, if I have a minute.
Okay, go ahead, and then I'll come on to that.
Okay. And so then there's the monitor piece. So they were also very worried because there are 3 or 4 different actions against Colombia. And by making this deal, they settled all of those actions. So this was the remedy. They certainly found a better remedy that Colombia could live with than the remedy, the drastic, almost death penalty remedy that the Trump administration had in mind. But the other clashes are over this anti-Semitism. Now, I'm Jewish myself. I think that there were some excesses. I don't think things got to the point. But the Trump administration said they got to the point. There's civil rights violations. And that's what the $220 million fine over 3 years is supposed to be. They're going to pay this huge fine that they didn't do more about anti-Semitism. One thing that these universities did, they did it at UCLA, they did it at a lot of different universities, was they allow these encampments, Mark. And people have gotten very used to the encampments. They go all the way back to divesting South Africa. It's an earlier generation that remembers all of these encampments against funding or doing business with South Africa. Now they've, of course, moved into not doing business with Israel, these encampments. The encampments are very disruptive, Mark. If I were an administrator, I would have, I think, been more cautious about these encampments. I mean, having, 100 students who just, or non-students, just kind of live there and demonstrate for what they're demonstrating. And they don't go home. And every day, you have to end up going around them.
They're setting up in the quad there, or whatever they call it. They're setting up in, but it impedes people from getting to class. It's incredibly disruptive. I never thought they should have allowed those things to set up.
And, almost all the universities did that under Biden and with the protests. And I think part of it, they felt justified because what Israel was doing, the settlements were bad enough, but what Israel was doing to Gaza was so extraordinary. It was so repugnant. It was like, we have to express this in some way. But when the expression became these huge encampments, and then it's just obvious that from the excitement of it all, as they saw a Jewish student with a yarmulke on or something like that, something that was especially distinctively Jewish, it got to be a very hostile environment for the Jewish student. And from the Trump administration's point of view, they didn't do enough about it. So what is Colombia going to do about it now as part of this? First, they're going to hire 16 or 17, basically cops, who are going to deal with it. The Ivy League schools, and you can't blame them for this, a lot of the schools didn't want to look like a police state. They didn't want to have cops all the time disrupting demonstrations. They sort of erred on the side of thinking the demonstrations were peaceful when maybe they weren't so peaceful, especially if you were a Jewish student, running into this hostility. So they have 16 or 17 people now who are going to sort of break up anything that starts to be bad. They're going to ask anybody with a mask on for ID. That's part of the agreement. So no masked people. The ICE is not covered by this deal. ICE can still come on your damn campus masked, but not someone who's a pro-Palestinian protester. They're going to be asked for their ID, take off their mask, I guess maybe take a photo of them. They're going to be these folks here, and they're going to have a monitor. He's a former assistant U.S. attorney from, who better to hire, Mark, than a former assistant U.S. attorney. He's going to be the monitor, and every 6 months, he's going to make a report. He's going to take complaints about any instance of anti-Semitism. One thing that mattered a lot to Colombia was that Colombia would not allow the federal government to pick faculty or to actually make the admission. So they got that. Colombia got that.
That was the original negotiating stature of the government, was that, you know, we're going to have control over your curriculum, over your professor hiring and firing. It was really scary.
So Colombia got that, but Colombia had to give, and did give something. I don't know, had to. Again, Colombia gave some things in it. One of the things they gave, there's also been this affirmative action ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's a whole other basket of stuff against Colombia. That got subsumed in all of this too. On the affirmative action piece, they have to tell they have to not engage in any affirmative action. They have to disclose, I guess, the high school record, the ethnicity and sex of the applicant, what their SAT score was. They have to have SAT scores. Remember, a lot of the universities were dispensing with standardized examinations. Colombia has to have standardized examinations submitted as part of the admission package. They have to know the race, sex, ethnicity of the person, and that allows the monitor and the public to look at, are they using, quote, DEI or affirmative action, especially now that the U.S. Supreme Court has said that you cannot use affirmative action in the way it used to be used. And the very last thing, Mark, is that there are there's a monitor that has to, not a monitor, but there's someone in charge of like Middle Eastern studies. They put in some provost who has to do with Middle Eastern studies. And I guess he's going to make sure, if you don't mind me using the expression, that everything is kosher when it comes to Middle Eastern studies.
Well, there is this, and we're out of time, but I just want you to respond to this. I'm seeing this more and more in the chat right now. Inlay says, he'll just ask Colombia for more. This administration will just ask Colombia for more. They just don't get it. You bend to Trump, and he takes and takes. And the encampments on the administration, not for Trump to punish. What about the fact that there's this notion that if you give in, you don't take the administration on, you are just going to be asked for more and more concessions on down the way? I think you've kind of gamed it out, and I think in a defensible way, the deal that they've made. But what about this? I'm seeing it a lot in the chat, which is none of these institutions should be giving in to the federal government.
Well, there's a civil rights division, and right now it looks a little bit like Animal Farm, right? That it depends who's in charge. But according to the Trump administration, there are these civil rights violations that are going on, and they're not against minorities and people of color. They're against Jewish students and right wingers who supposedly are not allowed to express their right wing views on these liberal campuses, and so they're doing something about it. And, they're in power right now. I mean, this is the realpolitik of it, Mark. They're in power right now. And Colombia just felt that the $220 million over 3 years was about the worst that was going to happen to them under Trump. And, like they're now allowed to bid on other grants. They're allowed to do all these things. I get it, Mark. I get it. But they just...
I completely agree. I mean, I think this sort of is something that you are very familiar with, because oftentimes in lawsuits of one sort or another, and we've certainly seen it in the case with Trump, right? He sues ABC. It's a winnable case. It's a ridiculous case. He sues CBS. It's a winnable case. It's a ridiculous case. He sues various law firms and prohibits them from entering federal buildings. That's a completely winnable case too, if they were to take that on. But it's just easier to tap out, write the check, and keep a relationship with the federal government that can redound to your benefit. And in this case, I think you game it out so well, David Katz, when you said, hey, look, there's all this other stuff that is so critical in terms of money. It dwarfs the $220 million. Just pay the $220 million and continue with these research projects to which you've referred, and life will be better at Colombia than it would be taking on the federal government.
And people who are depressed about all of this, yes, it's true that Trump may come for more concessions and he may come for more money down the road, but I think Colombia feels like they have that pretty much hemmed in and controllable. And of course, when the Democrats come back into power, they can make it all up to Colombia. And when the Democrats come back into power, it's going to be a lot of making it up. I mean, it'll be like undo. I think that'll be one of the great slogans: undo it all, undo it all. And
I feel like the refrain when the Democrats come back into power is sounding a little bit like when Jesus comes back. Because I don't know which one's going to happen first, David Katz.
I've got a lot of political faith.
I know. That's why I enjoyed talking to you. In addition to all the great legal knowledge, David, thank you for making us a priority and spending time with us today. So appreciate you.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.